Welcome to another episode of Video Store Rejects. This is a podcast where we discuss directors' filmographies one film at a time and our favorite film franchises. I'm your host, Cody House. With me, as always, are my co hosts, our social media content manager, Chris Jacobs,
How's it going, everybody?
our fact checker and researcher extraordinaire, Lindsay Jacobs.
Hello.
We have a returning guest, Daniel Sanchez. Daniel, thanks for coming back on the show.
I prefer the term artificial human myself, but it's
okay. Today we're discussing a film that kind of covers both categories. It's a director's filmography, and it's the beginning of a film franchise. We're, in fact, talking the sci-fi classic horror film Alien, the first in its franchise, the breakout film for Ridley Scott that he had one film under his belt, but this is basically the movie that he's been banking on most of his career with, because usually whatever new movie he comes out, it usually says from the director of Alien.
And I have to add really quickly, going from the Duelist to Alien is an amazing leap, and I will leave it at that.
Wait, hold on.
Of course.
Me. Street cred.
Nice.
Nice. Excellent.
There you go. And this is extremely excellent. It is stylish, and the conflict that the two characters has that sort of layered unavoidability to it that you can sense that the producers responded to in their decision to trust Ridley with what is otherwise a very straightforward haunted house in space flick.
We watched it for the first time for our last podcast, and I really enjoyed it. Like, I didn't know what to expect. I was like, oh, it's an older film. Is this going to be boring? I mean, I love older films, and I love period pieces and stuff like that. But I mean, let's be honest, some of them have come across as kind of boring over the years. But I really enjoyed this film, The Duelist. So, yeah, I kind of became a fan on that a little bit. So, I mean, it's kind of a deep dive, but yeah, I'm glad I watched it. So,
yeah, I would suggest that for any fan of Ridley Scott, because to see the pure creator at the young stage of their work, right, before the world has taught them other lessons, is always fascinating to see. Right. You know, the young Spielberg's thoughts, the young Coppola's thoughts. You know, what did before they became what they became? What did they have to say?
Right.
So that leads me to my first question, Daniel. What are your opinions on Ridley Scott as a director, and are you a fan? Because I feel like these first few films, he was on a journey to become an auteur director, but I feel like maybe because some of his financial flops that he had, that he's kind of become one of probably the most visually distinctive journeyman directors.
Yeah, I can see that. In the same way that I think Michelangelo, when hired to do the Sistine Chapel, complained, "I'm a sculptor, not a decorator." You know, because
that's right.
Because Ridley paints so wonderfully visual. I think he is sometimes hired for that. And, you know, we all do the things that we think will feed our true passion. And so I think so. I think he took some of this later work in hopes that he could get back to himself.
Do you think it's because of him we got a good visual representation of what H.R. Giger gave us? Like, do you think any other director would have been able to pull that off?
Well, the story is Giger was actually fired from the production before Ridley came on, at which case Dan O'Bannon saw his chance took the Omnicron book, put it in front of Ridley, and in Ridley's words, he about fell off the desk, yelling, "That's it! That's it! That's perfect!
Right.
Stop looking!" So the fact that he felt that way absolutely was why the Geigerness was unargued and in fact welcomed, I think, at a deep subconscious zeitgeist cultural level from not just Ridley but also Dan O'Bannon. I think they all agreed that they were saying the same nightmare dream cosmic truth at the same time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting thing. I don't know if you guys know the kind of the cusp of where this script started. Daniel, you mentioned Dan O'Bannon, who is credited as the screenwriter, which he is the screenwriter. He created the first draft, though there are several other people who eventually are credited for the success of this screenplay and film. But this general idea of this film comes from a student film Dan O'Bannon did with John Carpenter at USC, which they eventually turned into a feature film. It's basically a sci-fi comedy mock of 2001, but in the film Dark Star, that's John Carpenter's directorial debut that O'Bannon wrote and stars in, there's a sequence where O'Bannon is taking care of a beach ball alien that gets loose and starts terrorizing him. And that's kind of the cusp of where this movie came from, was from that little subplot of that film.
Oh, wow.
I recommend it's worth a watch. You can definitely tell it's somebody's first movie. It's not, Carpenter hasn't quite gotten the trademarks we know him for as a director, but I would put it up against a lot of his later films that he did near the end of his career as more interesting, at least.
I think it'd be interesting, but I mean, it's no THX 1138. Am I right?
Excellent.
But
I love that movie.
Yeah, but again, going back to what is the student work of these great visionaries that, with zero budget and maybe 4 friends who didn't think we were completely nuts, what story did they want to give the world? But the neat thing for me to think about is that was 1974. So he met John Carpenter at USC, just like a lot of these other great stories. It's the same, the Pixar story, a lot of these other stories, they met at film school. But if you think about 1974, where that was in science fiction, it was only 6 years after 2001: A Space Odyssey and Planet of the Apes. And 3 years leaning into what Star Wars would be when it was released. But Lucas is already thinking about Star Wars in 74. So you've got this like world is about to happen with science fiction. We're about to get all the greats. Spielberg's at school. We're about to get the guy who's going to do Close Encounters. And so Star Wars, Close Encounters, Alien, they're all about to hit. So in an ironic, pregnant pause.
What a time, what a time to be alive too, to see all of those. And, I'm a baby when it comes to all those, and I was born in 83. So just to get to see all of those in theater.
Oh, you were an Ewok. Oh. That's cute.
Yeah, I was an Ewok.
Oh.
I was an Ewok. Which in my baby book, my dad apparently had to go see Return of the Jedi, so he took me at like 2 weeks old because there was nobody else to watch it. He said I sat to the movie quietly, and they wrote it in my baby book. So it was destined.
Yeah. Well, I'm 1968, so I'm a little ape on this planet.
Nice.
But back to the former point, Cody, is that at USC, when Dan O'Bannon wrote Dark Star and his friend John Carpenter said, we'll film it, it grew out of control for a student film. And so it became like, okay, like all students do, let's make it real, let's get funding, let's make it a feature film. And so I think they got 60,000, but they had a really disappointing production. And I think Dan didn't like that it was such a comedy. and they ended up falling out over director credit because Dan felt like he contributed so much, he should have gotten co-director credit. And welcome to Hollywood. Your very first film, you end up fighting over credit and parting ways. But that young student fight gave us Alien, because Dan left bitter, saying, Thanos style, fine, I'll do it myself.
Yeah. He's like, I'll just do the movie I kind of wanted to do. He writes this screenplay, and then he gets Ronald, I forget how to say his name. I guess he was a friend too, who liked the script. Shusett, who was working on the Total Recall script, which the adaptation of Philip K. Dick's story. And he was like, well, this one is going to be a more reasonable budget because it's pretty much in one location. So let's work on your script. And Shusett is the one that came up with the chestburster scene. Like the idea of, well, the alien, well, they wanted they literally said they wanted the alien to rape someone. And they said it's got to be a male character because we don't want to be taboo and do the same thing that they've been doing in horror films. Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, why doesn't he just like impregnate himself and then like burst out of someone's chest? And I don't know if you guys remember, like at the beginning of the pandemic when like Texas was opening restaurants and everything back up, people kept memeing the chest burster scene as like what it's like at a restaurant right now.
Yeah.
It's actually an even more meaningful story than that. Dan O'Bannon suffered from and eventually passed away from Crohn's disease.
Mm-hmm.
And he described it as that his insides were trying to kill him, and that all of that intestinal pain that he would frequently have to be taken to the ER to deal with. He just always had the sense of that's my fear of death, is this bludgeoning that's happening inside of me that I did not choose. And he also grew up in the Midwest where there were cicada invasions. And I don't know about you guys, but I used to always love when the cicada would leave the husk, and it would just still be attached to the trunk of the tree. And you're like, how is that this husk still just holding on? And it always had that split where it came out. And, you always kind of just wanted to see it come out, just out of this morbid little boy fascination about it. But Dan, grew up with the sci-fi of the 50s, which was all bug monsters.
Mm-hmm.
There was Them, which was 1954, and everything was some sort of bug from the reaches of space. Dramatic music and angled type and pretty girl and scientist. I mean, they were all, that was his culture, and he mixed that with what he actually knew of growing up, with no phone, no television, just on a farm, and just seeing, yes, they do invade. Invaders do happen. And then knowing, wasps impregnate caterpillars, and all of these kind of influences came together. But he knew he wanted the chest burster concept, but what he didn't have was, how does the impregnation happen? And that's when his friend Ron Shust helped him with that aspect. So it really was a Lennon and McCartney duo where O'Bannon was stuck at page 29, and then the rest was thank you, partner.
And yeah, what's is interesting, you bring up his influences of being a baby boomer, a child of the 50s, growing up on that radioactive sci-fi, kind of the first wave of sci-fi popularity, is that this and Star Wars become kind of the two influential sci-fi films that are still, studios are mimicking that storytelling approach of those two films. Like we see an Alien ripoff countless times, all the time. And what's interesting is that Dan O'Bannon's like, well, I took a little bit of It Came from Outer Space. I took a little bit of Forbidden Planet. I took a little bit of Planet of Vampires and kind of put it in a blender. So it's like Alien isn't specifically an original film. It's just the execution was something we hadn't seen quite before.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I first saw the name Dan O'Bannon when I watched Heavy Metal.
Oh yeah.
He's credited with 2 stories in heavy metal, and one of them is a riff on his original idea for Aliens, which was gremlins aboard a World War II aircraft. So
which
the
we
heavy
got here
metal
recently.
story was zombies aboard a World War II aircraft, and it had that very, I won't say Twilight Zone, but more of an Outer Limits twist at the end, where he crash lands on an island and he thinks he's safe until he finds the other World War II aircraft, who were also taken over by zombies that has also crashed, and the zombies are there, and the last thing you see is they surround him on the island, and he's lived through everything else only to be encircled by the death that he fled. And I remember thinking, okay, the animation's like, ooh, heavy metal animation in this movie. But I remember being grabbed by that, like that, you know, the Arabic story of a man flees death on Monday only to see him on Wednesday, only to have death tell him I wasn't coming to you for 2 more weeks. You know, that cerebral mixed with the guttural. So I think kind of remembered that name, Dan O'Bannon. And I think he's been churning on that thing he wanted to say, you know, since those early days.
Part of this film's the reason Fox decided to greenlight it was because of Star Wars. They're like, well, Star Wars, we made a lot of money, so this is a sci-fi film. We've got it. We got development of it. Let's get this made. Maybe we can make as much money. And there's 2 other figures due to the success of this film, whether it's for good or bad. David Geller, who stayed on as an executive producer throughout this franchise until his passing a year or 2 ago, and filmmaker Walter Hill. They kind of rewrote the script a little bit, and from what I understand, a majority of what ended up as the final film is a lot of what their changes they made into the script. And they initially wanted Walter Hill to direct, but Walter Hill didn't want to do it because he felt like he wasn't capable of doing it, and Dan O'Bannon protested because he's like, he doesn't do sci-fi. He's not a sci-fi guy. And for whatever reason, and I think it is that visual flair that Ridley Scott had, because even though he had only had 1 film under his belt, he also was a commercial director. He had done, I think, up to like 1,000 commercials.
Oh, wow.
And I guess everyone was just really impressed with The Duelist, and they're like, I think this guy could do something interesting with this movie. And I guess they were right. And also, you're right, Daniel. I think Dan O'Bannon knew what he was doing, because O'Bannon had also was going to help write the script for the canceled Jurowski Dune film. And Geiger was doing designs on that. I think that's where O'Bannon, there's a documentary about it. It is wild, but I think that's where he was introduced to Geiger. And there's a little bit of a Lovecraft influence in this, not just because it's cosmic horror, but just the very nature of the alien design and how it's almost indestructible.
Like is the documentary that you're talking about Memory?
Well, there's one about just Jodorowsky's Dune, like all the concept art and everything.
I've seen that I have it on cue, but I haven't watched it yet. But I have seen the Geiger documentary, which is really excellent. If you haven't watched that, I highly suggest it.
There's another documentary out there called Memory: The Origin of Alien, and it's completely about, you know, just this film, but all the influences that led up to it, including the Dune, the failed Dune, where, yes, that is where O'Bannon, who was a special effects guy in those days, met Geiger, and you know, we can thank the fates for that. But the other thing we can thank the fates for is that you know, they really tried to go world changing with Dune, and you know, like a lot of times people have tried things, it was too big and it fell under its own weight. And O'Bannon found himself broke and homeless. He had no prospects, and truly like could not eat. And so he ended up back home in a house that he shared with other people, and that's where he met Ron Shusett. And the story is that Ron Shusett was also without income, and so Ron's wife supported the both of them. And Dan O'Bannon says that they kept him alive by feeding him hot dogs. And over the course of 3 months, they would bounce ideas back and forth. And that was the one night that Ron woke up the next morning and he shook Dan and said, "I've got it." And that was the night that he had worked out the face hugger concept. But it was in basically, it's almost full circle. He had gone back to being in college where you have nothing but ideas and friends.
And then, of course, the brilliant thing is that they left the characters non-gender specific. And so, not specifying a gender for a character, we get the brilliant casting of Sigourney Weaver as Ellen Ripley, which gives her also a career. Not only does this launch Ridley Scott as a Hollywood director, this launches Sigourney Weaver as a leading actress in film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was her first movie.
Mm-hmm.
She was a Broadway, a rising star on Broadway actress.
What I like about this movie, besides that it's just brilliant, I like that it's these blue collar people in space, like they're truckers or they're oil rig workers.
Mhm.
And one of the interesting. Go ahead.
Sorry,
Chris.
yeah, that was one of the aspects I loved. That they're on a mining rig, and like you said, they're blue collar and they're rough around the edges. I mean, they're in it for the money. They want to get home, so they can see their families. They're kind of pissed that they have to stop. They got woke up at this location, and they're worried about bonuses and stuff like that. So, yeah, that was in the rig itself. Like, I'm sure we'll get into the models and stuff later, but the whole rig and the ship itself is just amazing and really awesome to look at. So.
Yeah, Chris, I always love that, and especially the scene where Parker and Brett are and the way Brett, they're sitting at the table and he's like, bonus, like he's whispering to his bigger buddy, bring up the bonus, and Parker's like, oh yeah, by the way. But what I love about that is not just, it's good character development, but knowing you're about to see what Ridley Scott called a 10 little Indian story, where you're going to get picked off one by one.
Right.
And we know this. And so we're already trying to guess, okay, in what way? Like, based on the character development, how are you going to get yourself in that position where you're picked off? And those trucker conversations about, well, if you're going to ask me to do something extra, I think I should get it for something extra. And it shows that their first instinct is self-preservation.
Right.
And so later that ties into, okay, well then how are they going to be when faced with true self-preservation? Mm-hmm. Are they going to flip and turn into the character who sacrifices themselves to preserve another? But it only means something to know that at heart, these two guys are in it for themselves. Yeah. And they feel that they're the lowest two in the hierarchy. And so really that's all they can do is like squirrels, like, I just want my crap in Ice Age. They just want the little bit they can get. And I find that, like, it just infuses the whole 6-person cast with so much more meaning, where you don't want some of them to get picked off, but you have no idea, because as you said, they were all written as unisex characters. They're all written somewhat on an equal playing field. And so there is no true leader. There is no true hero, because Dallas's leadership is questioned. And props to y'all. Yeah, the hierarchy that's even supposed to exist, you can see that the two guys at the bottom have a hierarchy of their own. And there's definitely the big dog and the little dog, even between Parker and Brett. So it's this wonderful statement on, is there even such a thing as being in command when faced with something that affects you all?
Right.
So is that partly because Parker's the bigger guy, or is he like the guy in charge of maintenance and Brett's like his underling?
Well, I mean, if you'll notice, like he came in when he came in and they were all having a meeting, and Ian Holm is in his spot, and he goes, "Hey, man, I think you're in my spot." You know, so I think he's used to pulling some weight around there. Like he's loud, he's boisterous, and kind of totally opposite of what we saw him in James Bond. I was going to mention that. Props to Yaphet Kotto. I love him.
And Homicide.
Oh God,
yes.
he's so good on Homicide.
But yeah, I think it's just he's the loud one. He's the loud one in the group. I've seen it. I've been in that situation. Like he's gonna be he's kind of I don't want to say alpha, but he's kind of like the self-asserted leader of the two, I think.
Well, he's got the confidence, right? He's got the confidence and the cockiness, and he's like, well, someone has to speak up or we're always going to get screwed over.
You can be a smart ass, and he was talking about, well, I ain't doing no more work unless, we see some shares or whatever. Sorry, guys, I'll get my doggy. Go ahead.
That's fine. But I think also that little scene between him and Ash, Ian Holmes, the science officer, I think partly they don't trust that guy, which, later we reveal there's a good reason. But I think there's a little like, I don't know what this guy's up to. And of course, they think he's a company stooge. And also, they've never worked with him before because Ripley has hesitation about him, too, not only before he breaks protocol and lets them back on the ship, but just him in general. Like, of course, Ripley's the only person in the movie that's got any common sense or keeps her head level throughout the whole situation.
Yeah. And the thing, like, you guys tell me if you had the same experience, like the very first time you ever watched Alien, before we knew what Ash was. He totally suckered me into liking him because he was the science officer, and Mr. Spock taught us all the science officer is a good guy. So you see this story and you meet the science officer and you're like, well, clearly he's the good guy. And he turns out that it's the other big reveal that we did not expect a second one. But on rewatch and knowing again that this is now 1979, so we're only 11 years past 2001: A Space Odyssey, and growing up on Asimov's 3 Laws of Robotics, as I'm sure a lot of us did, when you see the scene of Ash rolling the newspaper or the magazine and attempting to forcibly kill Ripley, that slight glitch that was in his left eye really intensifies. And then you see the entire head shake, and then you see sort of his system malfunction happen. And then it's shortly after that when Parker and the rescue team kind of comes and pulls him off of her, that he starts doing that Blade Runner replicant, death rattle. And in rewatching the film for this show, it occurred to me, this is really the first time he's tried to kill a human being. And did he violate the Asimov protocol in the way that Hal in 2001 was able to somehow resolve conflicting orders? And yes, he murdered the crew, everyone except Dave, but Ash was not able to resolve that. And it makes me wonder, like, was that the failsafe? Were those the Asimov laws failsafes that just made him utterly conflict and shut down to the point where they had to restart him again to ask him questions? And in that case, I thought, oh, credit to this entire team, because that's not fan service. That's good science fiction. And if this world is to the point where when they discovered Ash was a robot, that's the only thing they said about it. There was one sentence that said, he's a robot. They weren't, robots don't exist in our future. How did someone make one that was so realistic that it could pass as a human? They weren't surprised at the stage of technology. They were just surprised someone had betrayed them by putting one on the ship, not that they don't exist in their timeline. So therefore, if they have, replicant style been part of human culture for long enough that they're to this level of we can fool you achievement, then maybe that's just great science fiction, that Asimov's laws were part of those from the beginning, from the original Bicentennial Man factory. We're not going to allow this in our home unless we're sure it's not going to chainsaw us.
Mm-hmm.
So again, whether that was Dan O'Bannon, whether there was Ron Shachette, whosever idea those little touches were to put that in the character of Ash, it was just one of the things that makes it still stand up, compared not just to film since, but compared to all science fiction written or filmed.
Here's something I found on the web. According to Gutenberg.org.
Computer off. It's responding to that word. Anyway.
I could be wrong, but I think when I was looking this up the other night, I think it was Walter Hill and David Geller's idea to make Ash a robot. I don't think the character was originally supposed to be a robot, but what a brilliant, and I never thought of that before, Daniel, that like that was what was going on, was like his directives were interfering with each other, because clearly the Weyland-Yutani company put him on that mission to make sure that they did what they wanted them to do to bring the alien back at no matter the cost. But yeah, maybe, his initial programming, they're not supposed to harm humans, was, the two directives were interfering with each other. I also think it's a brilliant execution of what people think of what people who work for corporations will do, like to get what they want.
Right. Which they did again in the sequel, which made it even doubly wrong.
Which is going to bring up how I knew the reveal, is because sadly, people of my age who were born after the original came out, a lot of us, I think, saw Aliens first and then went back and watched Alien. So I knew there was a robot because she mentions it in Aliens when she finds out that Bishop's a robot. Right. I just didn't know who it was going to be. I was like, somebody's a robot. I can't.
Right. Yeah. I'm with you. I saw Aliens first. That was 1986. So I was a senior in high school, and it was, that was a fine, I can watch that. The original Alien, I was 11. So did not see them in proper order for various good parental reasons. But, since you bring up Blade Runner, now that we also know that it's a shared universe, because we all geek out over that purge screen that Ripley hits. And of course, the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, we now know, is this shared universe. But when you think of Ash and his speech about how much he admires the purity of the creature and its freedom from morality and basically human weakness is his point. It's yet another statement of how replicants think, and how his desire is to not be subservient to a lesser life form, in the same way that was Blade Runner's statement at the end, with right. I've seen things that you could not have seen and survived, and yet I'm the hunted and I'm the threat. And so again, you see Ridley Scott begin to play with those themes of how a superior life form views the lesser life forms, and how in a shared universe that life cycle has to continue through conflict and victors and losers. And then depending on which side of that you are, if you're the caterpillar, the wasp is the villain. And so that's what just makes it so fascinating. Even from that shared universe perspective of androids and replicants.
And that brings up something interesting too, thinking, the androids, why do I have to be subservient to these stupid creatures? Because think of, Ash he's a science officer, not just a robot, but he's a very intelligent, cold, calculating figure. And we have this guy, Dallas, who's in charge, but he's kind of incompetent a little bit in his role as the captain of this ship. And not only because he's not thinking clearly, or he's just like, I just do whatever the company tells me. It's like, because Ripley is questioning his command. And I don't know. Maybe this is just me reading into the subtext of their performances and their body language, but I feel like there's something going on between Dallas and Ripley, or something has gone on between Dallas and Ripley in the past.
I don't know, Chris. Did you get that feeling?
Not really. Like I didn't, but now that you said it, now I want to go. Like the next time I watch it, I want to keep that in mind. Like now I want to watch for their body language to see if, because it could be a possibility. Maybe it was something that was supposed to have been in there, but they kept it out for some reason or decided not to play it that way. But it's a possibility.
That's the prequel one shot where Ripley and Dallas were together and they had just an unworkable, untenable romantic relationship. And they said, you know what? Let's just not even deal with it. Let's just go in cryo sleep, and then we'll just be home and we'll be fine. And instead, they're woken up and now they have to deal with each other again. Like, oh.
Well, Ripley had a daughter, right? That could have been Dallas's child.
I don't know if it's that deep of a relationship. This could be just like we're been on a ship for years together, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows? Maybe. But so we all saw Aliens first, so we know Sigourney Weaver's the one who makes it out of here. But apparently, a lot of people were like, "Well, I don't know who's gonna make it when Tom Skerritt's character Dallas gets killed in the ducts of the system trying to track the alien down." Because I guess a lot of people just assumed he was going to be the hero because he's the captain of the ship.
Sure,
right.
And a big, strong, handsome man, which is a very psycho trick, though. Take the one you think, and then kill him first.
Every time I just see Strawberry from Up in Smoke.
Oh,
he was cousin Strawberry. Who had PTSD and blew his parakeet away.
It's Top Gun for me again.
Yeah,
in the 80s. It's Top Gun.
That makes sense.
And likewise, Brett is Molly Ringwald's dad in Pretty in Pink.
Oh yeah.
Just with a cat.
But I remember Roger. Well, I don't remember, but I read that Roger Ebert, one of the things he cited this film for being so interesting and different was the ages of the actors in the movie, because most of these actors are in their 40s or 50s. I think Sigourney Weaver and Veronica Cartwright were the only people under 40 in the movie. Mm-hmm. And it was like most of these actors in the film are like in their 20s.
Right. And Veronica Cartwright is the only one really that had sci-fi cred. So
that's right, because she had been in Philip Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers remake.
Body Snatchers. And then me, being a slightly older guy, I grew up with her as the girl from the Daniel Boone TV show, the Walt Disney Daniel Boone show.
Wow.
Yeah.
But another thing people may not know is one of the better Twilight Zones that was ever filmed was called I Sing the Body Electric. And it was a precursor to the Electric Grandmother. This is a very Ray Bradbury era where it's the first time you have a robot in the house, and she's this lovely older lady because your mother's passed away and the father has multiple children. I think there were 3, and it was just very, very difficult for him to maintain it all. And so he had money but not time, and so he bought an electric caretaker, this woman. And little Veronica Cartwright was the daughter who rejected this entire concept. And I won't spoil the Twilight Zone ending because I'm an American, but it's worth seeing, not just for the story itself and not just because it's one of Rod Serling's better ones, but because you see young Veronica Cartwright starting out in science fiction and just fitting right in.
Right.
She also was Gus Grissom's wife in The Right Stuff.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Who was maybe
also
not really on board with someone she loved getting in a spacecraft. And an uncredited bit part in Speed. So we all remember the woman with the baby buggy that was cans. It's just cans. It's okay. That the bus hit. Right before she crossed the street, she's talking to another bag lady, and that other bag lady is Veronica Cartwright.
Okay.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Wow. I was gonna mention she's I guess the lady that gets possessed in Witches of Eastwick.
Yep.
Hmm.
She was also in The Birds. So science fiction, suspense, space programs. I mean, she was as perfect to be an alien as Sigourney Weaver was to be in Galaxy Quest.
Mhm. I feel like she played the mom in a TV show, but I'm not 100%. I could be getting her confused with another actress, but
Well, she still acts, so she's had a very long career, and I'm positive you're right.
yeah.
So this first drew my attention to this last watch because I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on Ridley Scott's prequels, Prometheus or Alien Covenant, but one of the complaints people make in those movies is that, oh, these people are supposed to be smart and they're doing stupid things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, John Hurt's character Kane sticks his head in the egg when he sees it. Is that not stupid?
Yeah.
And no one complains about that.
Yeah.
I watched Alien again last night with my wife, although we did it in the middle of the afternoon with all the lights on. And, we got to that scene, and I literally said, and this is the moment where we all learned you don't put your head over an alien anything.
Right.
Prior to that, I don't know, but this is where the current world has no excuse for sure.
Well, and they were all when the face hugger came off of his face, they were like, "Oh, well, let's dinner's on me. Let's go eat together." And and just hop into cryo freeze, although you just were molested by an alien creature, you know.
And again, on a rewatch, I realized, oh, this is where we should have known about Ash, because as the science officer, he should have been the one to say he is not fine until I run a full battery of tests and scan him completely, and then scan him again. You know, we have no idea, but Ash didn't say any of that.
And when he starts convulsing, he just sits there and kind of has this look on his face like it's happening. Like, I'm just gonna do your thing, little buddy.
He sits there with that same look that I was describing earlier of a little boy who always wished he could see the cicada come out from the shell. And what and how does that work? And just I want to learn about nature, and that's like in its purest form. I'm curious about the machinations of it, and I just want to learn. That's the look in Ash's eyes. To the complete, I don't give an F about whether the host survives. That's not his agenda.
I never liked him anyway.
and this is where McCoy would have stepped in and cussed everybody out and said, "I'm taking him, to medical bay." And McCoy would have given the whole bridge the finger in order to protect human life. This is where we should have known, but we didn't.
McCoy also would have followed protocol and not let him in on the ship either, though.
Yeah, we would have heard a lot of damn it Jims about that.
And see, that's a slip. Even then, I would not have known that he was the bad guy. Even in that moment where he lets him in, you think he's just acting on impulse, like I want to save my friend. Not. Well, I need to let him in so we can get him on the ship. I don't want to keep him in quarantine. We need to let him in, So that's the first real indication that, he was, the bad guy.
Yeah. And I think too, like culturally, myself having been a kid who grew up during the 70s, I very much remember like the feminism, desire to have more of their perspective known by men, and this in a way just seemed like, well, because Ripley is a woman, a man just decided, well, she's wrong, I'm going to hit the button. And it didn't matter rank, even though probably the science officer felt that in this case he outranked just Dallas's second in command. But it also had that air of, shut up, Ripley, and I'm going to hit the button anyway. And just as a chauvinist, misogynist thing, that was just one of the first abuses that would start tilting dominoes.
Well, I definitely got a sense of that in the scene where she goes and questions him, where she's like, when when Dallas and Kane are off the ship, I'm in command. I'm the commanding officer. And he kind of just is like, well, I'm the science officer, and this seems more like a science officer call.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, well, you're just a woman. I don't really have to listen to you. You're not Dallas.
Right. But again, 1979, that's what a cultural touchstone that is, because how many women worked very hard to achieve a certain status in an office only to be constantly having to deal with this. Whether they are still able to defeat it isn't the point. The point is they're constantly having to deal with it. And, I think in the character of Ripley, that's one of the reasons that she has that strength that she has, is because you realize she's fighting little battles all the time. And she's having to justify her decisions all the time. And probably the way she made it to be Dallas's number 2 was because she did know regulations backwards and forwards. And she did know good decision making, because otherwise she wouldn't have gotten this far.
And like I said, she's the only person with common sense on the ship. And even though it's condescending, he's being condescending to her, and that's exactly what they're playing with. I think the character Ash himself does not care. It's just like, I have an agenda. I'm going to do what I have to do. So do you think he knew that the alien was going to chest burst out of him? Do you think he knew a little bit about the xenomorphs biology already?
I think he knew it was in him, and I think that he was going to use them like Burke was going to use the crew in the second film as a transport. They were going to freeze it. He was probably going to freeze it, and probably didn't realize that it was going to happen so soon when it did. Maybe that's one of the reasons why he was in awe, or just kind of sitting there, like you said, like, ooh, it's happening. Like, I get to see it,
Right. Yeah. I mean, and imagine the computing power that's going on inside of Ash's head, right? So and you notice he positions himself opposite at the table.
Yeah, just so he can see it.
He's probably looking at, vascular things in the eyes, and is the sweat pattern changing, or is the breathing pattern at all altered? Like, he's probably just doing things that normally you'd be hooked up to a machine for to be measured, but Ash is doing this with just his replicant computer power. And then the scene where you start to see John Hurt, something is wrong. We don't know what, but something is wrong. Ash continues to sit there and stare at him. And then at a certain point, he bolts up and goes around. And that's the point when all the other crew are grabbing John Hurt and flipping him over. And you realize now that we know what we know, you realize that the reason Ash bolted was to protect against the humans, to make sure they didn't do anything that damaged whatever it was that was inside John Hurt. So he went to the rescue of the still yet unknown symbiotic whatever it is. He still cared more about that, and that's the part that is so beautifully faceted, which is why this movie never gets old.
Yeah, and I think actually Parker had a good idea, even though after they let him on the ship, they should have froze him.
Yeah. And you got to love alien movies, because there's always those people that just like, well, here it is. If we had just done that, if we had just nuked it from space, or, and that there's always, the character that's the voice of reason, which in this case is Veronica Cartwright's character, like, well, why don't we just leave? Why don't we just get in the shuttle and be where it isn't,
Right.
And in fact, she didn't want to take the role until Ridley Scott explained to her, like, I know on the page it doesn't look like you contribute very much, but you are the true voice of the audience. You're saying everything that they're thinking. You're more connected to the audience than anyone else in this film, and that's what convinced her to take this role. But on a personal level, because I saw Aliens first and then I saw Alien, when Veronica just breaks down and she's crying and she's like, "Oh, we just need to leave. Let's just leave. Let's just leave." Like, she was the original, "It's game over, man."
Yeah. Yeah. This is above my pay grade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is she the pilot? Is that her role on the ship? Is she the pilot?
I think she's pilot.
I think so. Yeah.
Navigator, pilot, something like that.
Because Kane is second in command, right? And then Ripley's the lieutenant. So that would make sense that what is her name? Lambert? Lambert's the pilot. And I think it's very interesting for a 1970s movie of this genre that the three surviving people at the climax of this movie are two women and a actor of color.
That's a good point.
Because usually that is not who's left standing near the end of these type of movies, especially at this point in time in Hollywood.
Right.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool. Again, Yaphet Kotto for the one.
And I think that's what helps this movie is not just Ridley Scott's direction and how he positions things, because apparently his storyboards that he did for this movie doubled the movie's budget. Fox was like, "Okay, you got a vision."
Yeah,
but I think
just from 4.2 to 8.4 million, they doubled it.
But I think the casting of these veteran character actors across the board help elevate this material and create the suspense, because we are in Veronica Cartwright's shoes. Like, let's just get the hell out of here. What are we doing? And sadly, most of us would not step up to the game and be Ellen Ripley. We would probably be Lambert and just break down when something that huge is coming towards us.
Right. Although I do love, again, this was probably completely unplanned, because we all know that the chest burst scene, although the actors knew the scene they were filming, they were not told the full extent of how it would be, happening in front of their faces. So we're all super familiar with Veronica Cartwright's reaction when she had much more blood spurting at her than she was told there would be. But if you watch again, you see Sigourney Weaver hide behind Yaphet Kotto during everyone is just behaving as human beings to this shock. So knowing that then, okay, we're supposed to interpret that as Ripley's reaction. When this thing happened, Ripley hid behind Parker. So for all of her inner strength and her good compass of judgment, and for all of those things, when this explosively violent near-death experience happens, she hid behind the biggest guy that she could hide behind, which is fantastic because it shows Ripley is not a two-dimensional warrior female Amazon character. She's a real woman who in that moment did not feel like she could handle it all by herself, and she did need some form of being protected. So you got to, if you're going to look at this film, if it had some feminist messages, I like that it didn't go too far with that, and it still brought it back to, but we all have shared qualities, and frankly, I would have hidden behind Parker, so I don't begrudge Ripley for doing it either.
And I mean, that's a growth and a progression of where she starts out in this movie to where she is in the sequel. And even when we get to the final confrontation on the shuttle, she is singing a song to herself to try and keep her mind off of being afraid.
Yeah.
And to fight this thing, because, she thought she blew the ship up. It's dead. She's done. And here this thing has invaded her once again. So that was an interesting scene too. And it's she's singing to keep her mind focused, and because that's what humans do. You got to do something when there's an impossible task you have to do and you're afraid to do it.
Right.
And I wonder too, just sort of in the history of this genre, because I'm not a complete horror guy, so I can't, speak to everything that came before this movie. But how many times do you think before Alien was there the perceived win and then the relaxing calm of the story, only to be confronted with, but it's not really over? Because we're so used to that now with Michael Myers and some of the, but I guess I'll ask you guys, was this still a shocking thing that the alien was not gone and it was in fact in her tiny little protective freedom bubble?
I think back then it was probably more of a shock, but today we're so used to having, like in the second film when it happened, you're like, well, there wasn't a big boss battle, There wasn't, it's not that easy. But back then, we weren't really exposed to all the double endings that we have now. So
the after credit scenes.
And the after credit scenes and all that. So I think it was more of a shock back then. I think people were probably relieved, like, oh, they blew it up and she's gonna live happily ever after. But in the fact that she is sitting there messing with controls and it's right in front of her and she doesn't see it because it's blended in with the wall is the biggest shock. Because everything already looks industrial. Thank you. Yeah, it looks industrial to begin with. So it's just blended in. It's beautifully just right there. And
if we've all had a moment where that's happened, probably.
If you live in East Texas, that's going to happen with snakes.
Yeah.
You'll be. I have been standing there. I do a lot of I have done a lot of hiking, and I have stopped to drink water, and have just been enjoying the scenery and like, all right, and get ready to walk away and look down, and I've been standing over a huge snake the whole time. And you're gonna wet yourself if you don't have a strong bladder, and your heart's gonna stop, and you're just gonna have that oh my god moment. It was right there in front of me,
right,
the whole time.
Yeah,
and they delivered that.
And like as younger, more mainstream moviegoers, like the only thing we had to really prepare ourselves for that, it would be Rudyard Kipling written Disney movies, because unless you've seen the boa come down behind Mowgli and Mowgli doesn't know it, or Nog and Nagaina are coming up behind Rikki Tikki Tavi and he doesn't know it, that was it. Like we saw it in cartoon form, but just Brett standing there chasing Jonesy.
No.
And then suddenly you see that shape. It just took on a whole other meaning because it blended so well into where it was.
Right.
And you realize that's that cicada thing. You don't know it's on the trunk until you see it. And how much more scary is that? And also just talking about cicadas, like the size of the chest bursting worm compared to the size of the full grown alien. One of the criticisms of the movie, besides it's so slow, is how did it grow just in mass that big that quickly? And Ridley's answer was, don't ask questions.
Yeah.
That's none of our business.
That sounds kind of like when Ben Affleck was like, why wouldn't you just train astronauts to drill on an asteroid instead of sending untrained astronauts? And he just looked at him and was like, shut the F up. We're making a multi-billion-dollar movie here. So don't ask that movie.
But that's my favorite sequence in the movie, just because that reveal.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think you're too invested in what's going on, and you're wondering, well, who's going to go next? What's going to happen? That
right.
You're not even thinking about that. But also, it just bursted out of a guy's chest within hours. So, of course,
right.
It could shed its skin and grow in a matter of less hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and when you go back and learn that, am I correct in assuming they're weapons, right? They were meant to be biological weapons. Do we know that? Was that explained?
I don't know if that's fully explained in Prometheus and Alien Covenant, which is interesting that that's the juxt of where Prometheus goes, right? Because I didn't even think about that dead, massive, whatever he is. Yeah, the space jockey when they when they go into the ship, right? I didn't even think about that dude. And we do learn that they kind of created or engineered the xenomorphs for whatever reason, and then it backfired on them.
It seems like they were meant to be a weapon of some sort, but I don't know. That's just speculation on my part.
Well, that would be in the same vein then as the Kryptonians who created Doomsday as a weapon, and then realized that it had become the superior life form, and they had to self-preserve.
Because they have a queen. There's sentient there somewhere,
right?
So
and, there's also,
it does seem like
there's also shades of Jurassic Park. Everything that Jeff Goldblum said could be applied to what led up to Alien.
Just because you just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, you can't keep life in a box. I mean, we're sorry, Jeff. We're very, 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 very sorry.
Oh man,
why hasn't he been in an Alien movie?
Hey, we're getting them all back for the next Jurassic, so
we are.
I hope they kind of. I'm not going to get on a Jurassic Park kick, but I don't want to say disappointed in the second one.
Oh, you mean the actual?
But it
second
wasn't as the out of the newer trilogy, the Jurassic World, the second Jurassic World movie, totally went in a direction that I didn't know they were going to get into. So I'm interested to see how they're going to wrap it up. So, and I am excited to see the OG crew coming back. I just hope it's cool. I just hope it's done right.
Yeah. Well, luckily, since we're talking Alien, sequels and prequels discussions are allowed in general, in concept. But I will say the second of the Jurassic series was one of my first real experiences with being totally disappointed that a plot thread wasn't carried through. Because they never dealt with the shaving cream can.
Right, yeah.
I thought that was going to be like the inciting incident for the second movie, just like you need the inciting incident for a second act. And I kept waiting for them to say, how does that shaving cream can come into play? And it just didn't. And so I now understand how people who watch Lost all the way through feel, and how
Lost.
how difficult it is, I think, to keep some of these story threads through. So we really have to appreciate them when they do happen. But
speaking of a plot thread that doesn't carry through, I want to know what happened to Jonesy. Who's taking care of him on that space station?
I am.
Oh, well, thank you. You traveled into whatever century or year it is in the Alien universe and rescued Jonesy from whoever was taking care of him while Ripley went off to fight the aliens again. And then sadly never returned.
Yeah. Justice for Jonesy.
Well, let's just hope it wasn't.
Well, isn't Jonesy just one of those creatures from the Marvel Cinematic Universe? It's really.
Oh, is he a Flurgan or whatever they're called from Captain Marvel? He's just Goose.
Yeah, Goose.
He's a fracking Flurgan.
If that's the case, then he wouldn't have been so emotionally traumatized when he watched Brett be murdered. But I feel like he was. I feel like that cat's like got PTSD now. Which I heard.
What a great cinematic storytelling choice, though, to have Jonesy's reaction be our reaction.
It's so well done, and just hearing Brett's screams, but then seeing like glimpses of something in Jonesy's eyes. And I heard what they did to get the cat's reaction was that they put a German Shepherd on the other side of this mirror and then revealed to the cat that there was a dog on the other side.
Oh, wow.
That cat does have PTSD.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a
That's
Golden
why
Globe
that's why he
nomination.
needs an emotional support Sigourney Weaver for the rest of his cat lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, and there were those moments in the film where I thought, wow, original choice of how to handle a moment. So, you know, face hugger jump originally to Kane in the found spaceship, right? And then immediately just a quiet exterior of this crescent moon shape as it pulls back. You know, no sounds of screaming, not the crew. Oh my God, what is it with him? You know, what are we going to do? I mean, normally you'd hear a good 2 minutes of film. We got to get him back to the ship. Oh no, there's still the storm outside. We got, you know, all the radio transmissions back and forth. It skips all of that and it just shows this very, very quiet exterior. And that's one of the payoffs of the "it's so slow" criticism of the movie. Of this is supposed to really let you know how alone they are. And it's fine when everything's going fine, but then it's not. And you now have seen the claustrophobic corridors, and you've seen just how far away from everything they are. And you know, I would equate it to like a really good telling of Little Red Riding Hood would show the forest first, so to show how small and alone and vulnerable she would be. You can only appreciate that by showing the darkness and danger and unknown quantities of the forest, and then to encounter a predator when there is no quick escape, because you realize fleeing this way is no faster than fleeing that way, and running back is no help. And so to be truly a victim, you first have to show the basically the kill box, right? And them's fighting words anytime somebody says Alien is so slow, because that means you don't appreciate Kubrick. That means you can't watch The Shining, because it does the same thing. Here is the resort. Now here is the resort in the winter when you're snowed in. Now here is the resort when there's just a few of you trapped there. Now here is the resort where there's a few of you trapped there, and one of them is a psycho murderer. You get that from large, smaller, and that's what Ridley does. So by the time you see Dallas in an air duct, that's the culmination of what he started with, from the vastness of space, now down to Dallas in an air duct, now down to Ridley in an escape pod. And we feel that, and we don't like that as human beings. We do not like that, because the next logical progression is I'm dead and I'm in a casket.
Well, I mean, the tagline for this movie is "In space, no one can hear you scream," but I don't find this movie slow at all, because I'm invested in what's going on and the unknown, like what's going to happen next. And I mean, if you complain that this movie's too slow, like you said, then The Shining's too slow, then The Thing is too slow, then almost Jaws is too slow, even though we start off with a kill. I mean, that's just that's the design and the connections of this genre. Is you got to build the suspense before you get paid off.
Yeah. And again, this movie was just what, 3-4 years after Jaws, if that. And the opening shots inside the Nostromo have a very Jaws quality, because we know the film is called Alien, and you have this slow walkthrough of corridors, and then the walkthrough of the bridge, and then for some reason there's wind that blows paper, and then for some reason there's a box that moves. So it's so reminiscent of the opening scenes of Jaws, where it's a camera going through water, but in that case we know we are the shark. This is the shark's POV. That's why the water is coming past our field of vision. So it makes us wonder, the opening of the interior of the Nostromo, like, we don't think that's what this is, but we're trained to be wary. And so even the cinematography choices set up that feeling of it could have been behind that crate. This time it wasn't, but next time, you know. And so that what can't we see dread that comes from Jaws is one of those things, I think, that just adds to that subconscious genetic fear we all have, that at one time we were not the dominant species on Earth, and the fear of being prey to something is still there. That fight or flight is still there, and something moved in the underbrush of the Serengeti. Was that wind, or was that something that was caused by agency? And those of us who fled and went up a tree, if it was just wind, we suffered embarrassment. But if had it been a predator, we lived. Those who stayed in the brush and continued to say, I wonder which it is. Is it a tiger or is it, they died. You know? And so we are quite literally the descendants of the more fearful. We're the descendants of flight. And so we still have that, I think, in our DNA to have that dread at that most base level.
And as far as of a horror aspect or suspense aspect, I always feel what we don't see is more terrifying than what we actually see. I mean, Hitchcock did that throughout his career. It's actually in the original Texas Chainsaw and Halloween. People like to think those first films are more violent than they actually are, but it's what we fill in the blanks of our imagination that make those movies more violent. They're really not. They're violent, but they're not gore fest like people think of when they think about the movies, because they fill in the blanks of what is in their head of what happens to the characters. And I think the same can be said here with this first Alien movie.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you make your own fear, which is so much worse than someone trying to guess your fear, because you know what it is.
And that's always the debate, especially with this and James Cameron's sequel. People are like, well, which one do you prefer? Which one is better? Well, it's almost like saying I like an apple better than an orange, because even though they're both sci-fi, their execution is different. This is very much a haunted house horror film, whereas James Cameron's sequel is a roller coaster, action-packed war movie.
Right.
And they're both great films, but I do slightly prefer this film over Aliens, because this movie, even though, yes, I know there's not a 7-foot xenomorph waiting for me around the corner, this movie does affect you, or did me watching it at a young age. To like, after I watched it, I was like checking under my bed. I was like, is there something around the corner? Like it kind of messes with you psychologically, even though, you know, yeah, there's not an alien gonna eat me, but like it makes you question what's out there in the unknown. Like,
See, and the fact that you believe that on a physical level, that in your real world outside the movie screen, you still need to double check. That shows that it reached you, and not only did it reach you, but Ridley and Dan and Geiger knew how to reach you. They knew how to dig into the subterranean layers of you.
Yeah, it was definitely effective. Like I remember the first time watching it through it, like I was familiar with Aliens, you know, but again, that's more action movie than it is horror. So going into Alien, it was more of a shock. Because, you know, I was younger still when I watched it, and I wasn't just a huge horror movie guy. So that's back when they still like scared the crap out of me.
Right.
So it did it did its job. It worked, even for being a product of 1979. It was very still one of the best horror movies.
Yeah. And, I mean, there are a couple of things, like, again, I was still a teenager when I went back and saw it after Aliens. But even the dissection scene where, you've got Ash with his tiny little prodder poker thing, which looks like the one that Tony Stark posed Bruce Banner with. It just has this ickiness that you remember from being in school and being told you have to dissect a frog or you're going to fail science class. You have no choice. And so here you are just like, yeah, and you don't want to, and it's like people are with spiders. But to see, just the inside gooey, icky, yucky, it's a repulsion that happens.
Right.
And I think that's why both Dan O'Bannon and Ridley Scott, when they saw Geiger's work, they were like, I'm repulsed. I have to have that.
Well, it's more of it's very, again, I'll use the word industrial, but it's very anatomical and alien at the same time. There's a lot of suggestion in there. If you're familiar with his work, and you'll see it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people just see aliens, but after going back and seeing his work and watching the documentary and stuff, I'm like, oh,
yeah,
okay, I see where he was going with that. So yeah, it's very again, when they're dissecting the face hugger,
those are real animal body parts. That's probably why you're ooged out.
Yeah,
I think that's another
very, very, very good on the oog factor there, and
I think it's tapping into that another like primal instinct. Like if you see guts of any kind, you're like, oh, I hope they're not mine if they're on the outside of something. It's just that. I mean, I know plenty of people have like blood phobia and things like that, but it's especially because it's an alien's anatomy, you don't understand what those parts are. That fear of that fear that comes from not being able to understand something like is just like another layer of terror added. And with practical effects like KY jelly and shredded condoms, I don't think there was
Yep.
I don't think there's any mistaking that it's meant to make you as uncomfortable as possible, even when it's not actively attacking you or bursting out of your chest.
We've kind of addressed it, but there is always something disturbingly sexual in Geiger's designs, right? Just by the way he designs the opening of the ship and the alien's skull. And I'm glad you brought out that industrial look, Chris, because I feel like, well, of course, he did come back to do designs on Alien 3, but I feel like that's what David Fincher was trying to do with that movie, was get it back to the roots of the original design and look of, and kind of make a more suspenseful horror film, even though it's now kind of be reclaimed as it's not a bad movie. But I guess at the time people were wanting something more like Aliens. I guess people forgot what the first Alien movie was, and that's why they were so angry with Alien 3 when it came out.
I've always enjoyed Alien 3, the director's cut. Anyway, I'm a director's cut.
That's a whole episode of itself, but I guess it's technically called the assembly cut because David Fincher doesn't want to own this movie because of how much studio interference. So the producers and some other people just cut what they had before the studio took it out. But it's almost a different movie in its execution, or at least like the characters' motivations for things. But I think it's a deeply fascinating and much better film than people give it credit for, and especially under the circumstances of how it was made, that it ended up being as competently put together as it was. And that could be just who knew David Fincher, because they didn't know what kind of director he was at the time that he would become. But I think it's a much better film than people give it credit for. And the whole Newt and Hicks thing, this franchise has always been about Ripley above all else. So that wasn't like a devastating thing to me watching it, that they were that they
they
were
wouldn't have
killed at the
served a
beginning.
purpose in that movie anyway, and where they were headed with it, they just would not have. It would have Newt especially would not have needed to be in that storyline. I don't know. It made sense. You know,
So
I'm with
does
you,
that
Cody.
so does that mean you wouldn't want to see what Neil Blomkamp was gonna do with Alien 5 had they hadn't greenlit the Ridley Scott prequels?
You'll have to remind me what they were.
He was basically gonna make a movie. Well, they've done it pretty recently in newer franchises where they like ignore the sequels that supposedly fans don't like.
Yeah.
So they were gonna ignore Alien 3 and Alien 4 and have it take place after the events of Aliens. I don't know what they were gonna do to explain how everyone aged 30 years, but
Right.
you know.
Huh. Well, I liked Aliens 4 too. I thought it was a fun 90s flick, you know. Anyway. All right. Sorry. Back to
Went down the sequel tangent, which happens when you talk about these movies. So I'll just go ahead and keep it going. Daniel, what are your thoughts on the further progression of this franchise? Do you hate it, or you like some of them, or you're like, they're never going to make it as good as which none of them are as good as this first one in my mind, but I've kind of.
I will say, as much as I love the first movie, the second one was like the Wrath of Khan. It ended up being a good sequel. You know, like you've got the motion. I'm not comparing Alien to the motion picture, two totally different films, but I'm just saying you've got a slower setup. You've got the setup. You've got the introduction to things, how things are going to go in this universe, and stuff like that. And then you've got the sequel that comes along. Now, sequels, as we know it, are hit and miss a lot of times, or mediocre. But I really think that he pulled what they did with Star Trek, and they came in, and the Wrath of Khan is still mind blowing to me. It's still a great movie. I'm partial to Undiscovered Country myself, but Wrath of Khan is still just an awesome sequel. Like, it still holds up to being a good Star Trek sequel. But that's the way I feel about Alien. Like, you got aliens coming in.
That were written by Herman Melville and William Shakespeare, which is perfectly valid, because they were about something about the human condition. You know, I think I would equate a lot of Ridley's Alien and James Cameron's Aliens to Richard Donner's Superman and the Two Dicks Superman 2.
Now, what about the Donner cut of Superman 2?
The theatrical releases is as far as we, the audience at the time, could buy tickets for.
Right.
You know, because even in my younger days, I loved the original Superman. It was a perfectly structured film. The tone was perfect. Everything about it was perfect. The only thing that it didn't have was just this comic book knockout, drag out, punch for punch, being outnumbered against things that are just as strong as you, comic book battle. You know, and then we got that. And so then it was a hard choice to make. It was, but I love that too, because that's what you want. You want your Superman to be against those odds, in a totally different flavor film that had a totally different purpose and a totally different goal at the end. Although it did carry forth the Lois Lane thread, you know. So you look at the Alien, the first two anyway, and you think, you know, knowing that it started out as Dark Star, so that's the 1950s black and white Superman TV show version, and then it ultimately matured until they hired a director who would take the material very seriously, aka Richard Donner, and then he brought, you know, every bit of verisimilitude in the horror science fiction genre that he could, as Donner did into the fantasy superhero genre. But I think after Alien 1 and 2, there was no more voice. So, like you said, Fincher tried to go back to Ridley's Alien in the same way that Superman Returns tried to go back to Donner's Superman. And it not only didn't quite get there, we've seen that.
Right.
And yes, it's a love letter to what we revere, but we're going backwards instead of forwards, I think. And then, I like Joss Whedon's early writing just as much as everybody else. And he tried to make Alien 4 work, but when you're overruled, you're overruled. And no matter the premise that he came up with, or a lot of the ability that he has to do a ensemble cast dynamic, it just didn't work. It was not there.
Well, I also think that's why they brought in Jean-Pierre Jeunet, because they're like, oh, well, this guy's French, so we can even muscle him more so than we could Fincher, because even though Fincher was a first-time filmmaker, he was an established American music video director. So I think there was even more like studio issues with Part 4, so much so that Jeunet has never made a Hollywood movie ever since. He's like, I'm just going to stay in France and do my movies because I don't want to deal with that.
And the parallel equivalent there is Richard Lester in Superman 3. The Salkind brothers knew they could push him around. So you get Superman 3. And I have, of course, watched Prometheus, and I've not seen Alien Covenant, but I was all excited for Alien versus Predator back in the day. I mean, again, I'm an American. I've got to see Alien versus Predator. I don't care. That's not a movie you go to for the plot. That's a movie you go to like Superman 2, just want to see this fight that. It's Godzilla versus Hong Kong, King Kong in Hong Kong. You don't go to a Godzilla versus King Kong movie for any other reason than get to the fight. So that I would say I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the first Alien versus Predator movie. But that's the only one since Aliens that I could say I truly was, glad I went. The others were disappointing on some level or multiple levels. And Covenant, I don't know. You tell me.
Well, it's a lot of the I have a soft spot for this franchise. I'm not a huge fan of the Alien versus Predator movies. They're the first one's fine. The second one's just awful. But I have a soft spot for all of these films. I like what Ridley Scott was trying to do with Prometheus, and I think people want a traditional Alien film, but I don't think that's what Ridley Scott's interested in. So Covenant's kind of a mixture of him giving the studio an Alien movie, but him also like bringing in this weird philosophical religious conversation. The main reason to watch it is just for Michael Fassbender's performance, because he plays two characters in that, and he's probably the best reason for both movies is just his performance.
I agree with that. He is the best part about those movies.
But they're not done with this franchise. They're developing a FX television series from Noah Hawley, who did the Fargo TV series and Legion, and I don't know what that's going to bring about. Don't know what it's going to do. Could be interesting. Could just be them milking whatever last droplets they can out of this franchise.
Well, I'll be curious to see if they can update it to our cultural touchstones now, because I think that's a lot of what made it work in '79. Just like a lot of what made Donner's original Superman work in '78. When he says, "I'm here to fight for truth, justice, and the American way," and Lois laughs at him and says, "You're going to end up fighting every elected official in the country." But post Watergate, post Vietnam, post civil rights struggles, make fun of it if you will, but America was ready for someone to say, "I'm here for the right reasons, and I just want to help, and I promise." I'm not lying to you. And they made a point in that movie of saying, I don't lie. And culturally at that time in 1978, we needed that. And
It was the optimism. It was kind of like Star Wars. Like
Star Wars was the optimist future.
they credit that is all the movies. You have all the disaster movies coming out at the time, and all the political movies, and all the movies that were just about were just downers. And then you got movies come in. Yeah, you got movies like Superman and Star Wars that it's just they're fun and full of optimism, and the good guys win. And like you said, he is here to fight for true justice and, the American way for the 70s being post all of that. So yeah, I mean,
and even in the the struggle of feminism, we got a very strong Lois Lane, who was not a token character. She wasn't written to be a man, but she was the daughter of an army general, and you could tell like she's not the old style Lois Lane. She's a new style Lois Lane. As we go into the 1980s, this is the new woman, and she's clearly the best because Superman chose her, so that makes her the best. And so get ready, America, because this is going to be your new style of woman as we go into a new decade. And then 1979 comes out, we get Ripley, and it's get ready, America, because it matters if you're capable, and in the end, it matters if you're capable, and that's the message. And I think a lot of the you can totally understand why a female audience would immediately respond to this complex, fully fleshed out character in Ripley. So the trick is then how do you get the male audience to go along with it? Because now we're at a certain point of the film and it's being carried by a woman in an action horror genre, right?
Right.
And so it was just so interesting that they went with the Geiger and with these biological fears and a lot of the sexual overtones, just in the reproduction life cycles of nature and other animals overtones, that you get as a male audience member, the fear of you're now pregnant. As a male of the species, you have been impregnated, and you've been impregnated against your will, and you've been impregnated by something you don't want. Well, talk about something that resonated with the 1979 feminist movement of, oh, this is what it feels like to not have any say-so over my body and my reproductive rights. I don't know if men sat in the theater watching Alien thinking about that. That's probably not, the immediate lesson that they learned. But in some part of their body, they were revulsed by that for a reason. And a lot of it is this loss of control that this character had no say-so whatsoever, that they had this happen to them, this biological thing that now has, put them where it's put them. And my point is that culturally that hit right then for both sides. So I'd be curious to see if they can find what is it that's going on now. Like 24 hit during the time of terrorism. And so, we're all like, okay, Jack Bauer is our modern guy, give us Tom Clancy novels and Jack Bauer. That's what we need right now. That's our Wayne. That's our Superman, So what is it now? And what fears do we have now that the writers of the new Alien can give us? And what new hero?
Yeah, because if they want this franchise to survive, as vital and important as a character as Ellen Ripley is, they have to find it, because we can't keep going back to the well. But that is so interesting, because that was the cusp of things going on because of women's rights and Roe versus Wade and all these things. Sadly, these are still topical issues going on in our society with Me Too and all these allegations of these powerful men abusing their power and taking advantage of women and making women say and do things they don't want to do. So maybe a lot of male audience didn't resonate with the message that was going on in Alien as much as they should have.
Well, not enough to relinquish their power over civilization. Unfortunately,
Exactly.
one movie
Yeah.
can achieve that.
But yeah, that is why I love this movie so much. It is one of those movies that captures something not only going on in society, but kind of transcends and changes the genre to where it becomes a prototype movie where people are like, oh, we're going to do the Alien approach. We're going to do the Alien.
Right. Hey, so you guys probably may know better than I. Check my timeline on this. As far as James Cameron films, what came first? Terminator? I think it did, before Aliens.
Yes, he did the first Terminator before Aliens. So
Right.
I think we owe a huge debt to Ripley for giving us Sarah Connor.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And almost any strong protagonist female that comes from these genres, Ellen Ripley is right at the cusp of this. I mean, we also just had the Black exploitation movement with Pam Grier as a leading lady being a woman of action, but Ellen Ripley is very much a cornerstone in the female action lead character.
Mm-hmm. And something I even picked up on last night watching this with my wife is that, you know, there was a point where even my wife goes, why is she messing with the cat? Just run, you know?
Poor Jonesy.
And I said, I understand that, but in the bigger scope of what the story is, and especially, you know, you get into this Alien 2 and Alien 3, it's a story of two women and two mothers, right? And even in this first one, Ripley's desire to protect the cat, I think, is she's just lost the entire crew. And there's a part of her that wants to save something. And, all right, here we go. We have our unanimous consensus. But also, I think it's because we need something on the humanity side to balance all of not just the alien biology side, but the artificial intelligence unhumanity side. So we basically have three things to balance here. And in the end, Ripley shows just that extra little bit of humanity to remind us this is who we are in this triangle of survival. You know, because like you said, we have David in the Prometheus stories, and yet we have the engineers who we now only know as the space jockey and the aliens, and then we have the human race. And so it is this battle for life in this ecology of how is it going to play out, that I think Ripley trying to save Jonesy was just that reminder of we're still us in a movie that shows how easy it is for something to come and change us from the inside. Ripley shows we're still us, and we end the movie with that. So it is that little bit of hope that we do like to see in films, that no matter what happens, we can end by still being ourselves, for good or bad, or for sequel or no.
Mm-hmm.
And we all would have been upset if Jonesy the cat did not make it out. We're fine with whatever horrible thing happens to these human characters.
Yeah.
Thank you. I hate to be the only person watching a movie that's like, if the animal dies in this, I have to leave. I'm not interested in any other part of the plot. If we're gonna kill the animal to demonstrate or to prove how vicious whatever the threat is, no thank you.
No, Lindsay, no Jonesies were harmed in the making of this film.
I know. I love Jonesies.
That's why whenever I have my own orange cat, that's what its name's going to be, because my wife is like, why do you always want to name a cat Jonesy? I'm like, Alien? Duh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd have to go between Garfield or Jonesy.
No, you guys
if I
are
had an
forgetting
orange
Morris from the 9 Lives bag. He's the one that's been keeping orange tabbies alive for ages. There is a website that you can check. It's like, I think it's called does the dog die or something?
Mm-hmm.
So I recommend that as a resource if you're a avid movie watcher who has a soft spot for animals like I do.
Is there a picture of John Wick just crying? Hashtag too soon.
Oh,
Oh.
Hey, I'm just getting over Old Yeller, so
Mm.
we each heal in our own time.
Oh yeah.
So Cody, I kept waiting for you to bring up Sir Francis Bacon, and I'm hoping that you still might.
Well, go ahead. Let's bring him up.
Okay. In the early formative years of H.R. Geiger, he was influenced by, obviously many things, and some of them were Egyptian sarcophagi and just the various gods and legends of Egyptian mythology. But another one were Sir Francis Bacon paintings. And that came full circle during the production of Alien, because Ridley Scott specifically pulled a triptych of Sir Francis Bacon paintings that were themed around the crucifixion and showed them to Geiger because they were having trouble coming up with the chest-bursting alien look. So this is Sir Francis Bacon and his imaging that led to the chest-bursting alien. You can really see, look.
Yeah, I can tell. Wow.
Nice.
And I find like it's so fascinating to see how these things come back, because in the documentary Memory that is about the origin of the film Alien, it shows a painting by Geiger of the 3 stages of life of the alien. So there's the host laying on its back, and then the chest burster, which then grows and then takes another host, which then becomes an egg, and then something comes out of that egg. But it's done in this pyramid style H.R. Geiger. There's so much interlocking on the sides, of course, and you get to the top, and is a representation of the Egyptian goddess of the night, whose name is Nut.
Oh.
So much like the original film, the ship is named the Nostromo, which if you look it up, historically was one of these ships that took silver back and forth, and it had its own form of mutiny and its own drama that took place on this, ship in the 1800s. This film, if you've ever wondered why in the world would they name a little girl Nut, it's not just some weirdness, and it's not that one of them was a huge Monty Python fan. It's again from that same wellspring of this Egyptian mythology of life is not life as we know it, and death is not death as we know it, and everything is more connected of what's in the heavens and what is on the earth than we think, and what is below the earth. And it's always about this Egyptian thing that Geiger was so fascinated with. And he also painted pretty much strictly from his subconscious. So he's one of those artists who, to paraphrase him, he said he never got in his own way. He just let his recesses and his dreams, a la Salvador Dali, just manifest. And so I think that's what helped all 3, writer, director, and artist dig into this sub layer that we all can resonate with, in the same way Spielberg does it at a childhood level. He can remind us of being a kid like nobody else. These 3 reminded us of just what are our biological imperatives of survival, and how do we feel as a member of our species, whether it's the impregnator or the impregnatee. It just went so far beyond 20th Century Fox saying we need something after Star Wars than I think anybody could have imagined.
Oh, for sure. I didn't even realize how deep that well went, that even James Cameron played with it in the sequel. with the Egyptian goddess there. So thank you because I knew the Francis Bacon influence on Geiger, but I didn't know it went so far into the franchise. But yeah, I don't think Fox knew what they were doing. They just knew it was a sci-fi movie. They wanted another sci-fi hit.
Yeah.
And
I think if we could credit one person on this planet Earth for giving us Alien, it would be Dan O'Bannon's mother, who, ironically, but who, as a child, absolutely under penalty of corporal punishment, forbade young Dan O'Bannon from reading science fiction books. Those were not proper reading, and he was not allowed to have them. So he read as much of those effing things as he could get his hands on. And thank you, Mrs. Midwestern 1940s O'Bannon, for raising your child.
I mean, that's always the issue when people want to ban things or block things. You're going to make that appetite for it even stronger when it's forbidden. People are going to be like, well, I got to see what all the fuss is about, or why this is naughty, or why this is wrong. What is in this thing that makes me want to, that makes people say, no, you can't be exposed to this.
Well, clearly, Mrs. O'Bannon had an uphill battle because, true story, her husband, Mr. O'Bannon, not just her husband, but her son, little Dan O'Bannon, faked a flying saucer landing on their farm. They perpetrated a UFO hoax in the heyday of UFO hoaxes, to the point where reporters came out, articles were written. So, yeah, parents, be very, very careful what you tell your children not to be interested in, because there's social media now.
Mm-hmm. This movie is so much more than what is on the surface level. And I think the three combining, well, I guess it's not just O'Bannon. O'Bannon is vastly credited because he created the story. But I think all these gentlemen and their involvement in making this movie made it something where it's transcendent to where it's still talked about 40 years later, and that we're still trying to replicate whatever made this movie good, even though usually they're just the trashy version of it.
Well, it's still Peter Parker's go-to plan when he needs to get off an alien attack on a spaceship.
There you go.
That really old movie, Alien?
Oh.
Yep. Well, Daniel, before we get to ratings of the movie, is there anything else you want to talk about? Or is there some other uncovered psychological, philosophical things to discover about this movie that we haven't tapped on?
No, you've let me rant pretty good, but I did want to sort of like come back to the cultural benefit we've gotten since the movie. So we got Sarah Connor for sure.
Mm-hmm.
We got the dancing alien in what, Spaceballs?
Yep.
Yeah. But here's the one that I in my research found and was just the most impressed by, is that in 2019, which was, as we all know, the year of Blade Runner,
mm-hmm.
SpaceX was doing unmanned space missions on a ship called the Dragon. And so they were still in we're not putting humans on these yet. We're going to launch them, bring them back, collect all the data, and so on. But they created a humanoid test, fully functional figure to sit in one of the seats and gauge everything they needed to gauge, the G-forces, everything. They named that because it was the most highly advanced humanoid information receptacle yet built. They named it Ripley. So SpaceX has sent Ripley to space multiple
Nice.
times. And thanks to Ripley, the manned missions will owe everything to her. So she saved us all. She saved future missions. But I just absolutely love that the respect that we have for what she did carries on in the same way, like when we first saw that there was a shuttle that was going to be named Enterprise, just how thrilled we were that the impact of it was not just at an entertainment level, but it was at a level that inspired others to really achieve. And Ripley has done that. I mean, Ripley is a part of the space program, and I think that's got to be one of the most incredible things you can say about a work of science fiction, because there's a part of all of us, I think, that when we read science fiction, we hope that it would one day be science fact.
No.
And you can say that about the character of Ripley.
For sure. I mean, what an icon, what a legend. Gave Sigourney Weaver a career and further created three-dimensional, strong, capable female characters that don't need a man to save them.
Mm-hmm.
So for these Ridley Scott ratings, because he's such a visual artist, I try to go with artistic ratings. So if we think this is absolutely a masterpiece, we think it's one of his best films, we call it a work of art. If it is entertaining, it does its job, it's an enjoyable film, we say it's constructurally sound. Or if we think it's a little obscure, only for fans, deep dive. If it's a little mediocre, doesn't quite live up to the standards, doesn't quite hit its mark, it's like a nice little pat on the back. Good effort, Ridley. Good effort. And if it's a disaster, it's a failure, it's horrible, well, that piece of art only belongs on Ridley's mommy's fridge.
Oh, boy.
You want me to go first?
Go for
It's
it.
a work of art. It's a work of art in my book. It's top notch. I was telling Cody earlier, because of course we're gonna watch the version that has the highest quality media, which is a Blu-ray copy, and I was like, damn, Cody, there are scenes in that movie that look like a modern day movie. Like they hold up to this day. Like you can see dated shots, but man, there's shots in there that look like they were filmed yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Because they clean up so well and it looks so crisp and clear. So it's gonna have to be a masterpiece among many other reasons. That's just one of them. But yeah, masterpiece.
Yeah. It's a work of art. My fridge should be so lucky.
Yeah.
The sheer style that he decided was going to happen and then executed on and then gave it to us, that we got. I think like 2001 A Space Odyssey just changed the game and is got to be clearly one of the ones that every film school will say, go back and look at these films. This has to be in that list. What kind of story that you can tell and the kind of mood that you can create, I think at that time hadn't been seen since Kubrick. And for it to be a second-time director, to me, makes that even more of a work of art. We're not talking about Kubrick at the height of his powers. We're talking about a guy who had done a set of TV commercials and a sword fight. And now he's done this. So to say it's a work of art means this was when we really saw what an artist Ridley Scott was. And and he cared, and this was the work that he made. So it's unquestionably a work of art.
Yeah, that's another thing I'm going to add too. One more thing is, like you mentioned, going from a history like a history period piece to a futuristic, to the future. Like that gap in between there is just amazing in quality. And don't get me wrong, I love The Duelist, but the gap in there, the jump is just impressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the Egyptian pyramid in the sand. That's how good this is. I mean, it stands alone, it stands strong, and it's still just as impactful now.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the culture around it has changed, it's still just as impactful.
But the pyramid. You go. If the Duelist is the bottom of the pyramid, he wound up at the tip of the top by his second movie.
Mm-hmm.
So just imagine that. That's just impressive. You don't see a lot of that. A lot of guys like Spielberg, like a lot of his stuff was great, but if you look at his, like, what was it, Duel? Like, look
That's
at
his
Duel.
first TV movie. That was his TV
It's good.
movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and he was directing TV shows, and then he makes that leap, you know. So I guess you could say he's one of the only other.
Well, you know, he
do it.
does Sugarland Express, then right after Sugarland Express, which is a very well-made movie, but it's a competently, you know, there's not really anything visually interesting. But then he goes
really
from that to
leap.
Jaws.
He had to work his way up to Jaws with another film. You know, Ridley Scott is just, here's The Duelist, and then bam, there's Alien. Like, you know, I don't know. It's very impressive to go from your first film to something that's as culturally significant as Alien is, you know, in the past 100 years of film. And Alien is up there.
And there was an interview that Tom Skerritt gave where he talked about the confidence that they had in Ridley, even as a second-time director, mm-hmm. that you felt from him, he knew exactly what this was going to be. And they would use the term visionary without irony. I mean, that is really what they thought of him. And to have that self-assurance so early in a career and have it not just be delusional. I mean, it was accurate. And then to follow that with Blade Runner, I think you know a work of art because an artist of true magnitude made it. And early Ridley was that.
Absolutely. Did Lindsay leave, Chris?
Yeah, there was a kid screaming in the other room. She jumped up.
Okay.
So
well, then I will chime in, and yeah, I guess it's obvious, but this is absolutely a work of art for everything you guys said, and especially being his second film. Yeah, he did commercials, so he had the technical skills he had to probably make a movie this good, but it's still impressive because, yeah, The Duelist is a well-made movie, but I don't think anyone in 1977 would imagine like this guy's next movie is going to be this epic sci-fi horror masterpiece that feels like it's directed by a pro at the top of his game, and this is only his second movie. And it has become one of the go-to films, not only for this genre, but this is still a movie referenced when we talk about Ridley Scott. It's like, yeah, he's the director of Alien because of how such a good of a job he made and how culturally impactful this movie was, and that it's just built. Like, apparently there were mixed reviews when this came out, but now find me someone that says Alien's a bad movie. Besides someone who just doesn't like this genre, you know?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it might not be your cup of tea, but you cannot say that it's because the movie is bad.
And I think these first 4 films of him is him at his visual top. You can prefer a lot of these other movies that follow later in his career, but I feel like there's a back and forth after Legend of him doing movies to get to whatever his passion project is. And that's usually some sort of historical epic, or it's some sci-fi, religious, philosophical discussion. Those tend to be his 2 zones, and sometimes they work out really well, sometimes they don't, and then he goes back to the well and directs some more things. Have you, Daniel, before we let you go, have you seen The Last Duel or House of Gucci yet?
I have not seen The Last Duel.
That is currently streaming on HBO Max. It is a deeply fascinating and well-made movie. I will say it can be hard to watch dealing with what its subject matter is, but again, it's playing with certain themes that we were talking about with this movie on a much more human scale.
Right. And from what I understand, the difference in perspective is one of the things that makes it a riveting story. So
absolutely, it does that Rashomon approach.
I will say that I do appreciate, as we look at Ridley's entire career, that he does have his favorite themes to come back to. And certainly, you know, Thelma and Louise touches on a lot of that female empowerment that to him, you know, we shouldn't have the word female in front of it. You know, he tells this story of, like, it's almost the Stand By Me of the other gender. Like this is no, in my mind, this is no different than, you know, young Will Wheaton and young River Phoenix being blood brothers than it is to watch Susan Sarandon and Gina Davis being blood sisters. And the fact that Ridley can do that with that level of just equal storytelling, of they encounter different things because of who they are, but they're still like, this is the Stand By Me story for them, and it ends the way it ends for them because their world is different and different things pursue them. So I love that he comes back to those Ripley-esque questions, and that he doesn't always answer the questions, but like any good storyteller, he just presents the questions. And then, you know, I'll give him that he takes some of these other projects, because then we get Gladiator. And I mean, I can't fault anyone the path that led them to make that and give that to us. So I'm very much a Ridley Scott fan, and an apologist even on his behalf if need be. But I will check out the new ones.
And then he's. What were you gonna say, Chris?
Sorry, Lindsay messaged me. She said to go ahead. She apologizes, but she says it is also a masterpiece, work of art.
Yes.
What if Jonesy had died? What would it have been then?
What's that?
What if Jonesy had died? Then how?
Oh, she would have been upset. I will vouch for her and
Okay, ask her that. We need to close the show with her answer for
that. What do you think of him?
Protested, even this many years later.
You keep bringing up Kubrick with Alien, and maybe there's a little bit similarities in Ridley's directing approach to Kubrick's, except that Ridley definitely churns out more movies than Kubrick ever did. Yeah. So maybe he wasn't quite the perfectionist or obsession as Kubrick was, but Ridley Scott's next movie is going to be something that haunted Kubrick throughout his life. It's going to be about Napoleon.
Ah, okay.
That'll be interesting.
That will be interesting. There is one stylistic thing that I noticed that they brought up in the documentary Memory, is that both Alien and Clockwork Orange used a cinematography technique of being very centered and static for some scenes, but then during a violent attack, very handheld and very obscure with the angles, so that it was more jarring, almost as if the person holding the camera was being bumped around with everyone else who was panicking, that it was a really stark contrast to these very still other shots. So in Alien, when you see all of them around the table and they're just eating, it's a very still shot. It's very calm. But then when the chest burst scene happens, they even chose to film from behind John's head so that you don't see his face, but you're like one of the crew of the Nostromo trying to look over his shoulder and trying to see. So that it's, well before any of the Bourne films that just put a camera on a monkey. You got this that was intentional to show the difference. And that is a very Kubrick 1-to-1 influence.
Before we leave, I just wanted to ask, did anyone watch the director's cut of this, or did they watch the theatrical cut?
Director's cut.
So you did watch the director's cut where they have the scene of Ripley finding Dallas and Brett being like cocooned with eggs in them.
Yeah. I was wondering which version you guys watched as well.
I watched the theatrical. I actually prefer the theatrical cut to the director's cut.
Do you?
And even oddly, Ridley Scott prefers the theatrical cut.
I'm all about the extra content, so you know me. I will go for the director's cut. There's very few films that I feel the theatrical cut is better, but I liked the director's cut of Alien, and especially of Aliens. I'm a huge, definitely for that one. I love that one being fleshed out a little more. So,
yeah. I think I've seen it, of course, and I remember the very first time that I saw that, I thought, oh, there we go, back to the insect world again. Of how horrible would it be to be captured by a spider, taken back to the web, and just cocooned to be eaten later by all the young. And to be awake for all of that, and to be poisoned so that you were physically paralyzed while it's happening. And as a kid, I got all those Ranger Rick magazines, and they did their very best to say, "Here's nature," but we know you're a child, but here's nature. And even so, you're like, "Oh, this is interesting," and so I'm going to go to my parents' World Book encyclopedias that we have had since 1972. I'm going to look up what really happens. Oh my God!
Both my parents were nurses, so yeah, they would just be like, "No, son, your foot's going to rot off if you step on that, and it's going to do this." And we're like, "Oh," they were just up front, like, "No, this is what's going to happen. This is what happens."
And then here I am, 18 probably years old. I've just seen Aliens. Now I want to go back and see Alien. And then, later you get that extra scene of Dallas up there, and it's just right back to that. You're like, so icky, and you put yourself in his spot so much. And there have been movies that I have watched where the characters kill me, and I don't buy it. I don't believe it. I'd say, no, at this point, I'd still want to live. I'd still want to keep trying. But you see this one? I don't want what comes next at all.
Right.
Nope. Hard nope.
Wow.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for returning to the show. Thank you for talking about this incredible film. We had one of our longest episodes, but sometimes a certain movie deserves that, and this is certainly one that deserves a long discussion, and I'm glad you were here to bring even more interesting and fascinating reasons why this movie is as good as it is.
Well, thanks. I always love being on the show, and especially to talk about classics. So, and I got to work in some Superman, so
there you go. Goals.
You
did it. Is there anything you want to plug or mention while you're on?
Nope. Viewers, just keep watching the show. It's a really good one.
Thank you so much. If you're going to watch the Super Bowl, I hope you have fun watching it. While we were on Super Bowl Sunday nerding out about Alien, I was only concerned about the Nope trailer, and they already dropped it online. So
Yeah,
I don't
I'm
know
waiting
what
for
I'm.
that Lord of the Rings trailer myself, so I'm excited about. I'm
And
excited
we're
about
back to
that.
Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Hey, I'm stoked about that, and I could get on my soapbox and preach against the people who are whining about it, but I won't.
That's a different episode.
That's a
of this show.
whole another 2 hour episode. But
Daniel, if
anyway,
if
that's
your
what
goal
I'm
was to
waiting
talk
for. It's supposed
about
to drop around 8 o'clock.
Superman, Chris's goal is to always bring up Lord of the Rings.
See, and that's the
Yeah.
Superman 3. We
I will
should
work Lord of the Rings in there somewhere.
Kryptonian
What's up?
versus Middle Earth. I'd buy that
Oh,
for
yeah.
$1.
Nice. Yeah.
I'll just bring in some sort
Parallels.
of tangent on some director I like.
Oh, we should have
But,
a topic roulette.
Yeah.
Oh, that's dangerous.
Speaking of director's cut, our next week episode might be one of the most infamous films for having so many cuts of it. We're talking Blade Runner next week. So stay tuned for that. I think it's probably going to be equally long and sweaty conversation, but that's what we're here for.
Right.
Once again, Daniel, thank you so much. I enjoyed this conversation, and I always love when guests bring more meaningful and topical things into the movie than what we thought we were going to talk about. So thank you once again.
And thank you both. And you, Lindsay.
Thank you.
So I hope if anyone watches this later on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, you enjoy the rest of your day. If you are having a Super Bowl party, I hope it's with people that you're around constantly. But you know what? We are, 2 years into this thing? I guess live your life. Just be smart and safe. Don't be Kane.
Also, Wednesday. Did you just?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I already told you.
Okay, so we're gonna do Across the Universe
Wednesday
nights. Tomorrow is my lovely wife's birthday. By the way, on top of Valentine's Day, so happy Valentine's Day to all you people out there. And
I reject the notion of a birthday.
happy birthday to my lovely wife who turns 24, 25.
Time is not real. It does not
I don't
matter.
know. She's in her early 20s. I don't know. wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But anyway, yes, next Wednesday for our late reject show, we will be talking about Across the Universe. That's the show my wife has chosen to talk about for her.
If I get to talk about it.
Yeah, if she gets to talk about it.
Great. Well, have fun beyond the outer room.
Yes. Anyway, guys, appreciate it. Thank you very much. Sorry, we have a.
Thank you, Daniel. You enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and you stay safe out there.
You too, Cody.
Thank you.